Destination together. Won't you set me free? I'll take a train, a plane, a big cruise ship. It doesn't really matter to me. Destination people always seem to find the magic and the mystery in this beautiful world. Don't get left behind.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Tom Anderson, and this is Webinar on Wednesday with Destinations Together. As always, a warm welcome to our Zoom listeners and cruise line executives that are tuning in. The future of the cruise industry seems to be unfolding before us. There appears to be progress on every front. Ships are planning to sail, cruise stocks are rocketing higher, and the CDC is seemingly working with a very frustrated cruise industry to find a path forward. This is all setting the groundwork for the future of cruising. To make this vision a reality, we must reimagine the future. Humans love to think and dream about the future. The future is brought to life by popular shows like Star Wars, Star Trek, The Jetsons, Lost in Space, or even experiences like Disney's Tomorrowland. If we can dream it, we can do it. So to create something new, humans literally reimagine or dream the future. Likewise, as we continue this journey out of the pandemic and back to some new sense of normalcy, we must dream and envision the future of cruise tourism. What will it look like? How do we make it sustainable? How do we create responsible destination experiences while at the same time meet the new safety and health requirements? The cruise industry and tour operator community are filled with people that are remarkably innovative and resilient. They will always find a way forward and dream up a new solution. And most likely, these solutions will be the seed of a new concept, a new product, a new experience that will be tomorrow's bestseller. In addition, they will likely support the future vision of responsible and sustainable tourism. Today's session is focused on the future of tourism as envisioned by Dr. Albert Postma and his team at the European Futures Tourism Institute. His team is doing incredible research in the travel and tourism space. In fact, Dr. Postma and his team have, through their research, created a virtual crystal ball, which is an explorative model for the travel industry. Using this model, Dr. Postma will discuss the future of tourism and demonstrate how you can use this model to reimagine your destination in the post-pandemic world. Today's presentation is hosted by Destinations Together, which is an open platform of relevant information and collaboration to support the tourism industry. There's a lot to cover in this magic carpet ride into the future of tourism. But first, don't forget to wish Larry a happy birthday on chat. I'll turn over the podium to the birthday boy and share so he can share some important information and introduce our guest speaker for today's Destinations Together webinar on Larry's birthday. Larry?
Thanks, Tom. You said you weren't going to do anything, so now what do I do? Anyway, thanks, and thank everybody out there too. All of our listeners, we're glad to have you join us today on my birthday, as Tom said. But first off, I want to recognize our presenters from last Wednesday, March 31st, for the webinar, Building a Financial Bridge Out of the Pandemic. Listen to Linda Keane, the Chief Executive of the Tourism Export Council of New Zealand, shared the New Zealand's Loan Guarantee Program developed for the tourism industry, and CEO Dennis Campbell and VP of Finance David Floor of Ambassador Tours in Canada, as they shared their experience of pulling together a group of Nova Scotia-based tourism operators to lobby for a provincial loan guarantee program. So we really appreciate their participation. Check it out if you missed it. Again, all of our webinars are available for free on our website, www.destinationstogether.com, and don't hesitate to socialize the website with others. Everybody is welcome. Before we begin, let me remind you of a few housekeeping items. And Tom, I've said this how many times now? I think it's our 30th webinar, and again, the 24th, I believe, is our anniversary. But anyway, let me repeat the housekeeping items for everybody out there. We will record the webinar and we'll upload it on our website and send out our normal thank you emails. There is a Q&A tab below on your screens. We look forward to getting your questions passed on to our guest speakers. We encourage you all to vote on the questions listed in the Q&A to help ensure we include those most important ones. Please remember, we and our guests are only providing our opinions and possible sources for further information. We're all thankful to all those joining us today from around the globe. If it is your first time, we're happy to have you join us today. And if you're returning, thanks very much. We appreciate your continued support. Today's webinar is about the future of tourism in the post-pandemic world, as Tom talked about. Dr. Albert Postma, please join me as I open up your presentation as I provide a quick introduction. Dr. Postma, professor of strategic foresight and scenario planning at the European Tourism Futures Institute, Stenden University, Netherlands. Following a rigorous study and research, Dr. Postma will share with everybody from what he and his colleagues see in their virtual crystal ball of the future for a travel industry, learn how this explorative model is utilized to reimagine a destination's future, tourism future. Albert, we welcome you to the webinar today, and we look forward to having you join us to provide your presentation today. And once you're finished, Tom will join back to walk through some Q&A sessions. And I know towards the end, you'll be looking for a poll that we'll be bringing up. We look for everybody's feedback on that. So with that, I turn the webinar over to you. Thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson, Mr. Stover. It's an honor to be here and to be able to speak to you. I was already introduced as a professor. I'm a professor in applied sciences, and I work at a university in the Netherlands, NHL Stenden University, as a professor in scenario planning. Actually, I'm already since the early 1990s working in tourism education and in tourism research. And we've done quite a lot of projects also in the United States back then. But since about 10 years, I am heading the research department in scenario planning at the European Tourism Futures Institute. And that means that we help the industry, the tourism industry, mainly in Europe and in the Netherlands, but sometimes elsewhere, to anticipate the future that they can foresee, and to be able to address this future and to take measures in time before it happens and before it's maybe too late. So last year in February, March, when the pandemic broke out, everybody was a little panicking, also in the tourism business, and we usually broaden it to the visitor economy. And we said within the team, we said to each other, well, we should give the industry some perspective, because it's up to us to help the industry with looking ahead and looking forward. Because what you saw since the beginning of the crisis was that most people, national governments and so on, were looking for short-term solutions. And basically, we try to do it in a different way. From now on, I will share the screen with you. So you will see me probably in the corner of the screen. And I hope that you will be able to see my slideshow. Here it is. So the title of my presentation is, please give us some perspective. These are a few headlines from Dutch newspapers. I don't read the American newspapers at a daily basis, so apologies for that. But what is clear from this slide is that many media write about the search for a perspective. And basically, the word perspective puzzles us a little bit, because what people say, we miss a perspective, but what they probably mean is that we miss a perspective that is good to us. I mean, from our perspective as scenario planners, we think there's always a perspective, but the question, of course, is what kind of perspective do we want, and what kind of perspective do we see? The problem with many of us is that we are conditioned during our lifetime, first by our parents, then by our school teachers, primary school, secondary school, and gradually our creativity is squeezed out, you could say. And if you're a child, your parents might say, well, don't touch something because it's dirty, or don't look somebody in the eyes because that is impolite. And then when you go to a school, you learn to write on a line. And in the past, it was not even allowed to use your left hand while writing. And then you go to university and you learn about the foremarketing piece. And so that means that gradually your creativity is squeezed, is narrowed. Your focus is narrowing, and you develop what we call dominant thinking. And once you use this mode of thinking that you have learned or you have acquired, you will each time you will go back to that if you're looking for a solution. So if something works for you, next time you will do it in the same way. However, if we consider our dominant thinking, it also means that we also overlook things. We don't see everything. So the question is, what are we able to see and what do we want to see? And what we normally do in scenario planning exercises is bring many people together with different backgrounds, different perspectives, different educational backgrounds too, and then to bring the knowledge and experience together to learn from each other and to share the knowledge, and then to come to solutions that you probably would not have come to if you would have done it on your own or with a small team. However, this time with the corona pandemic, we did not use a large group of stakeholders, but we used we made use of the researchers of 2 universities that are joined in the Center of Expertise in Leisure Tourism Hospitality. So that's a consortium of 3 universities, 3 applied universities in the Netherlands and a couple of academic universities too. And in projects, we often cooperate, and in this case, we joined forces with about 15 researchers from both universities to investigate some scenarios for the post-pandemic world. And if we look at the developments in tourism, for example, after the corona pandemic, the COVID pandemic, we have to realize that we don't have it all in our hands. Tourism and the future of tourism is impacted by many developments around the world. And this is just a few examples of incidents or events that impacted upon tourism globally. And we have the mobile technology, emerging technologies. We have the birth of internet, of course. The birth of the low-cost airlines, the Arab Spring with ISIS, and the fall of the Berlin Wall, which turned upside down tourism in Europe entirely. We had the attack on the Twin Towers, which had only a timely effect on international flights. And we are going towards the 4th industrial revolution because of Internet of Things. So this is just a number of examples, but normally in projects, what we do, we monitor media globally and put all the things that we think that are relevant for the future of tourism. We store in this kind of database, and if there's a specific project, we tap from it, and then we basically take out the things that we think are relevant for that specific question at the table. But for now, it's important to acknowledge that tourism is impacted by many forces around the world, many forces that we cannot impact upon, that we don't have into our hands. It's just we have to deal with it. And this dealing with it goes through a complex network. We probably are familiar with the systems thinking since the 1960s, and then it has declined for a while, but now we see increasingly the world as what we call a complex adaptive system. And that means that within such a system, everything is connected with everything else, either directly or indirectly via all kinds of interlinkages and change. So if your company, your business, your cruise ship or ferry company or hotel or restaurant, casino is one of those circles in this model that you see on the screen, you see that it's connected with many other things. And these things could be different political territories. So what happens in the United States is related to what happens in Europe and maybe to what happens in China. But what happens in tourism is also impacted by what happens in transport technology, for example, or in the airline industry. So tourism is interdependent on what happens elsewhere in other industries, in other countries, in other cultural domains, in other sectors, etc., etc. And that means that it's very, very complicated to foresee the future of a specific business in tourism, for example, or of a destination. And the interlinkages and the hyperconnectivity also mean that the system is very vulnerable to wildcards. A wildcard is a sudden event that comes more or less unexpectedly and turns the entire system upside down. And that causes discontinuity of trends, but it could also mean a tipping point of the system. A wild card could be a disruption. It's also referred to as a black swan. And it's interesting to look at the model of a plate, as you see now on the screen. If we move to the plate at the top, you can imagine that if you shake the bowl gets to the left and to the right. And if the bowl gets to rest again, then the bowl ends up in a balance in the middle. So the ball returns back to normal. And that is also what happens with systems, with social systems, economic systems. It can be shaken, but if it's not too much shaken, then gradually balance will return. We call that recovery or bounce back, or in business terms, business as usual. However, you could also imagine that if the ball is shaken very intensively, and that much that the ball cannot return to its old position, but passes the threshold at the edge of the plate. The ball gets into another bowl and gets into another equilibrium. You could call it, in terms of COVID, the new normal. It's a new balance. And we call that situation adaptation, reset, bounce forward, or business as unusual. The question is, of course, what kind of disruption causes the visitor economy to move from one state of balance to another? And that's something, that's difficult to foresee, because most of the knowledge we have is based on what we learned at school from our parents. I already covered that. And that's the green shaded area in this pie chart. That's the things we know about. However, we also know about things that we don't know about. We know that if we studied economics, for example, we are not experts in biology or in mining or in aviation. And so based on the study that we followed and based on the things we learned, we are quite conscious about what we do not know. However, there's a large area surrounding us in the field of knowledge, you could say, of which we don't know that we don't know it. It's just outside our scope. We just simply don't know. It never reaches us. We never consider it. We never think about it. And that's what I referred to before. If you work in a group with different stakeholders, with different backgrounds, different perspectives, that helps you to discover other worlds, other situations, other contexts. And that could help you to see things, to see solutions, to discover solutions that you might never have thought about if you didn't do that in such a way. And the funny thing is that if we talk about policy making, if we talk about strategy development, it's always about the future. However, the knowledge that we gained, and what we know and what we don't know that we don't know, is always about the past. So how do we do that? Well, the COVID pandemic could be referred to as such a black swan, as such a disruption, as such a wild card. Of course, we are not entirely sure whether the ball would pass the edge and cause the visitor economy to arrive at a different equilibrium, a different state of balance. But we can imagine that is the case. So it's interesting that we took it all as a surprise that many industries were not prepared for such a disruption as the COVID pandemic. Even more because it happened to us more often. We had the Mexican flu a couple of years ago. We had the Zika virus, which is on this picture in the middle, and the mosquito. And we do not learn from these things. However, strategic foresight, including scenario planning, is an approach to foresee the future and to look ahead in order to try to grasp what the future holds and to be ready for it in a proactive way before it comes and before it reaches you. A country such as Finland, for example, was much better prepared because they in that country, strategic foresight is embedded in many domains of national policy making and also businesses. And that's interesting. So what could be done is that we develop scenarios, because scenarios as a key tool in strategic foresight offer a perspective towards the future, a perspective that could unfold if the corona pandemic would be over. And of course, the word scenario is quite a popular word at the moment, because if I watch television every night, then we see our prime minister talking about scenarios. We see the health institution in the Netherlands is called the RIVM, with prognosis about the development of the virus. We see the government unfolding roadmaps to recovery, and they all call it scenarios, and that's a little bit confusing, because in the lay discourse, I think we should be more precise in what we mean. So if we talk about a roadmap or alternative roadmaps to achieve a certain desired future, we call that a goal-oriented scenario. So it's a kind of a strategy. If the health institutes present their prognosis for next week about, for example, the vaccinated people or the number of victims of the virus or the number of beds in the hospitals that are covered, in statistical graphs, we call that predictive scenarios. So forecasts about how it will proceed in the days or the weeks or the months to come. And quite common also in the industry, if we talk about economic forecasts in stock markets and so on. We call that all predictive scenarios. And there's a third category of scenarios that we call explorative scenarios. And in these scenarios, these are more qualitative of nature. In such scenarios, we explore the possible future and also the plausible futures. So we try to discover what the key factors are that will impact upon the future, and at the same time are very unpredictable. Where predictive scenarios start with what is certain, the explorative scenarios start with what is uncertain, so that we could get a hold on it and so that we could get it into our hands and understand it and grasp it. And what you usually do is that you create 4 scenarios. So in fact, we bring the complex reality with all those elements in the system back to 4 cornerstones, usually presented in a cross. Not so long ago, I had the idea to present it as a billiard table. In fact, you could consider the corners of the billiard table as the 4 scenarios. So they represent the extreme situations of how the future could unfold. But in reality, the ball at the billiard table will come to balance somewhere in the middle of the table, or a little bit more to the edges. But I mean not in the very corner. So that means that the position in the end will have elements of all 4 scenarios. That's the most likely. It's unlikely that one of those scenarios itself will completely come true, because it's not intended as a prediction. It's just intended as something to explore that could happen, that could plausibly happen. So in fact, you could say that the 4 scenarios define the playing field that the visitor economy has to deal with in the years to come. The first step that we always do, that we always take if we develop scenarios, is that we scan the horizon. I already touched upon that. So we as a team, we make a database of many things that we come across in the media. Not the popular media, but just experts that share something. It could be an academic article. It could be something in a journal. It could be something in a newspaper, or in a documentary, or in a blog or a vlog of an expert. So with our entire team of about 15 people, most of us follow such things, and we all store it because we all read different things. And we store that, we save that with a certain regulation. So we make a headline with the subject that it covers. We have the date and the source, of course, all these kind of things in the short summary, so that we can easily retrieve it. Once we have collected these data, as you can call it, we try to understand what we found. And in this case of this study, we also collected information specifically dedicated to the corona pandemic. And we especially looked into the opinions and the expertise of sociologists, psychologists, economists, and so on, anthropologists, and name it, all such kind of experts. And we came up with, let's say, 40 or 50 different observations. And then with our team, we try to cluster these observations. And that's part of the analysis already, because we do not cluster along teams, but we cluster along cause and effect, presumed cause and effect relationships. So in fact, you try to understand how the world operates with that impacts upon the visitor economy, and we try to understand how different observations impact upon each other. And in that sense, you create small clusters that you could consider to be small engines that keep the world moving, that keep the world driving. And then the next step is that behind each of the clusters, we try to identify the force that keeps that small engine, that small motor running. So what is the force that drives that small process? And we call these the driving forces of change. And you see them listed here, the ones that we identified: the attitude of national states, the attitude of the public sector, the attitude of multinational businesses, the attitude of citizens, especially in their role as consumers, and the length and the depth of the crisis. The next step then is to identify via discussion and debate and a voting process which of the two, according to the group, has the biggest impact on the future of the visitor economy, and at the same time is the least predictable, so the most uncertain. And we concluded that two of these driving forces were considered to be key uncertainties. That's how we call them: the attitude of the citizens in the role as consumer, and the length and the depth of the crisis. If we take these two key uncertainties together, and we represent them as a cross, we can first draw a horizontal line. That's the first dimension, the crisis, short and shallow to long and deep. So we always look at the extremes. The more extreme, the better the scenarios will become. And the vertical axis, the consumer, the citizen, with one extreme, the individualist citizen and consumer, so we call it the I perspective, and at the other end, as you can imagine, the more collective approach, the citizen that has learned to become more collective and more approached on the group instead of him or herself, instead of the self. So this frame is a very simple representation of how we think the world operates and how the macro environment impacts upon the future of the visitor economy. Of course, the situation is much more complex, as I showed you before. But yeah, we bring it back to a simple model of how we think the world operates. And if I would go back a previous slide, I don't do it now, but the other four driving forces are not thrown away, but they are put into the context of each scenario. And so, for example, the role of national governments is returning in each of the scenarios, but because the context is different, it will have different implications. So that's how we use all the driving forces that we came up with, but in a different way. But this is the scenario cross, as we call it. And in the left upper corner, we have one of the future scenarios, which is framed by an individualistic consumer and a short and shallow crisis. And we have called that the scenario business as usual. So that means the crisis is over. We return back to how it was, like the ball in the bowl. And that means that people go back to unrestrained behavior. Tourism recovers fast. We return to mass tourism, even to over-tourism in many places of the world, such as in Amsterdam. The visitor economy will start to flourish again, and the pressure on the economic and ecological system, social and ecological systems is high. So this is basically a return to the old situation. The second scenario is framed by an individualistic consumer and a long and deep crisis. And we see already signals happening. Today it was in our newspaper that one of the biggest tour operators in the Netherlands went bankrupt because of the corona pandemic. And in this scenario, we see many bankruptcies because there's less clientele, so less turnover. If the government sees a service as very important, they inject it with a lot of money. That happens, for example, with the KLM in the Netherlands and the airliner. And that is close to nationalization. So it's the share of the Dutch government in the company is so big that the next step would be nationalization. Things could be taken over. Because of the bankruptcies, the product gets scarcer. Imagine many tour operators go bankrupt. That means that the product gets scarcer and more expensive. They have to compete on price, and it becomes less affordable for ordinary people with a moderate income. So that also means that luxury, that international travel becomes a luxury product, and that faraway travels are only affordable to the happy few. And most of the people who want to go on holiday stay close in their own country or maybe just across the border. Again, we see signals happening in this scenario too. Last week, it became known that Europeans paid 20,000 to 30,000 euros for a 3-week holiday in Dubai, for example. And they arrive, they get their first vaccination, then they stay over for 3 weeks, and the day before they leave back to Europe, they get the second vaccination, and they have had 3 weeks holiday on the beach, and had a nice time, of course. But yeah, for this price, and that's an example. Ordinary people can never afford that. Of course, this is an extreme situation, but that's what we like to do with scenarios. So we try to pull people out of the comfort zone and to try to challenge them to consider the impossible. Because again, lots of things we don't know that we don't know about. So we should take it in consideration. The next scenario is business as unusual. That's what we consider to be the ball crossing the edge of the bowl. It's the direct opposite of business as usual. And we refer here to a transition of the visitor economy. So that means people have discovered that collectivism is probably better. Maybe you remember that last year it was in the media that the people living in India for the first time could see the Mount Everest. And the same applied to people in China because the sky was so enormously blue, clear blue. The same happened here above our house. We are also under the air corridor of an airliner from Amsterdam to Scandinavia, for example. And we always have white lines in the sky, but now it was so clearly blue. And I think many people discovered that. And we also see that hiking and biking has become much more popular. If you walk in your own neighborhood, you probably notice that too. I don't know how it is in the United States, but many people are making tours all day. We have seen a massive rise in the sales of camper vans, motorhomes, and caravan sales, all these kind of things. So people have become more aware. And so did the industry in this scenario. So that means the industry has also become more collective. And they try to find each other, try to collaborate, and try to reinvent the visitor economy. And in this reinvention, the technology, virtual reality, also plays a major role. And so we see that already happening with a lot of startups that come with new concepts in which virtual reality plays a role. And in the extreme situation, it might not even be needed anymore for a person to travel, because you can have it all on your virtual reality glasses, and even smells can be created chemically by a computer. So you can have exactly the same mental experience by just staying home and do it in a different way. So it's about tourism reinvented and collaborating at a local and regional scale. And in the final scenario, we have a short and shallow crisis with a more collective attitude of the people. And in this scenario, people really show responsibility. So they have become aware of the negative impacts of their tourism behavior. They inform themselves properly before they go on holiday, and they are aware of the ecological footprints they have. And they are also willing to pay more if it's less dramatic for the environment. In this scenario, we see that the industry is investing much more in local concepts because people tend to stay close to home for the holiday to reduce the ecological footprint. One aspect about this scenario cross is that the horizontal axis, short and shallow versus long and deep, is not an absolute kind of axis. And I remember when I was in the media April, May last year, people asked me, do you really think the crisis has not ended yet in December? And of course, I looked a little bit with question marks in my eyes, because we thought already that it would come back in waves, which is anticipated now also. But so what is short and shallow and what is long and deep is a little bit relative. So I think it is already not short and shallow anymore. I mean, we have passed that timeline already, and we are already moving to a long and deep crisis. Although, some countries are further than others, but we have to realize that it might come back, especially if people in developing countries, for example, are not vaccinated, and new types of virus will see daylight and may infect us again. So it's difficult to foresee, and that's the biggest uncertainty, of course, and that's represented in the horizontal axis. So when it will really end, we don't know. And the longer it takes, the more businesses will go bankrupt, and the more people are looking for other solutions to travel, maybe not physically, but maybe virtually. Each of the scenarios has different implications. So in fact, the scenarios themselves paint a kind of a context in which the visitor economy unfolds. And what we normally do in workshops, and we challenge the business to do the same, maybe you too as listeners, to try to understand what each scenario could mean for you. And that means that you could consider some attributes that are listed here. You could think about the key principles and values of your customer base. You could think about the type of tourism market that will be drawn to your business in this context. But also each scenario has different risks, and it's good to consider these risks. And that means that each of the scenarios that you can consider requires a different vision, a different roadmap, or a different strategy, or in other words, a different goal-based scenario. And as I already mentioned before, the billiard ball is coming to rest somewhere in the middle of the table. So that means it's likely that we will end up with a combination of different scenarios, but I'm really afraid that it will not entirely go back to normal or back to business as usual, as many people think it will. I think we have passed that stage. I'm normally not a pessimist, but I think it's just realistic to understand that that we go in a slightly in a different direction. Of course, in the media we learn and read a lot about people traveling far, but I think it's highlighted in the media because it's nice to write about. At the same time, I also know in the circles that I spent that many people are staying in the Netherlands, for example, for a campsite instead of traveling far. And many campsites are already booked for the entire year, which is quite exceptional because normally the occupation rate of the campsites is maybe 60–70%. And now it's up to 100% during the entire year. So that means that visitors from maybe Germany, our neighboring countries, have been replaced by Dutch visitors, and it's not going that bad with the industry as such. Of course, there's many businesses who have difficulties, but tourism accommodations are not per se suffering from this corona crisis. So I already mentioned strategic foresight. I think strategic foresight is a competence of a business. A competence in which a business is able to monitor the macro environment on a more permanent basis and to discuss it maybe with a management team, what goes on. So it's not a one-time effort once in every 5 years, for example, but it's a continual effort to grasp what goes on in the world around you. And then the second part of the competence is that you are able to translate this into driving forces of change and into scenarios. It's not rocket science. It's not too difficult. And what we do is we teach businesses to learn it, to acquire knowledge, how to do it. And many customers always think that many of our clients think that it's a one-time effort. However, because the world changes, you also need to update the scenarios on an annual or biannual basis. And so hopefully the axes do not change entirely, but the contents of the scenarios might get other angles or something like that. And so it's important to monitor the world and to see how it impacts upon your business or your industry or your city or whatever continually. And the challenge then is, as a business or as an industry, is to adapt to the changing circumstances. So 5-year plans, as I already mentioned, it's a little bit old-fashioned, between quotation marks. But the more contemporary approach to management is adaptivity. And so that means and resilience. So try to go with the flow, try to look ahead all the time and adjust in time, so that you don't have to change too much, but that you can slowly follow the course that you need to take to be ready for the future. And then there's a nice quote by Charles Darwin: "It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." That is what I just mentioned. And at the left side, you see a Dutch headline of the newspaper. I translated it into English. On top, creative entrepreneurs who can stretch their formula have the future. So you have to be creative. You have to be able to play with your business model, with your formulas, etc. That's the way to go. So strategic foresight is the ability to take a forward view, which enables action to be taken with reference to and within the context of the future. So this was the end of my presentation, and then I would like to make it a little bit interactive as far as the system allows. And Larry will start up a poll. So you see again the slides here, the scenarios here on this slide. Probably you've already read it when I gave the presentation. But what is interesting to know is which of the scenarios do you think is most likely to happen? That's the first question you get into the poll. And the second question, which of the 4 scenarios do you personally prefer to happen most?
And Albert,
Yeah.
the poll was open when we started, so people have answered the poll questions. And if you want to, if you see it on your screen?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Wonderful.
I'll let you proceed.
Yeah. So that's the first one is already interesting because we see many people. I don't know whether you're affected by what I told you when I said I'm not too pessimistic, but we see that many of you, or a few of you, think that return to business as usual is not really likely to happen. And then it's quite evenly divided across the other scenarios, and that underlines the uncertainty that we're in. So every one of you has a different frame of reference, has different knowledge, has a different background, etc. And that's how you translate this into your perspective towards the future. So you all, most of you see the future really different. And I don't know, by the way, why the bottom line is red or orange, responsible tourism, but anyhow, it's quite evenly divided. And when I go to the second question in the poll, we see that the pattern of your responses is quite different. Most of you, nearly 3/4 of the group, is pleading for responsible tourism. Of course, I like to see that, but there's also quite a substantial group, I think, that wants to return to business as usual, which I can fully understand. Both of these scenarios that score the highest in the second question are at the left side of the model. So both are based on a crisis that is rather short and shallow, so probably recovered in the course of this year. And I think the United States is already doing a good job. But yeah, the Netherlands is a little bit running behind. Anyhow, thank you for your responses. I'll take a photograph of this if you allow me to do that.
Sure, and I can send it to you too, Albert. And just know that since we did start the poll in the beginning of the webinar, there has been a couple of posts on chat saying that, hey, the results may be a little different now that you have gone through the presentation. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is relaunch the poll and let those folks go ahead and re-vote if they so choose. But at least it gives you a sense before, and maybe if things change, then you can address that. But I am going to hit the relaunch polling, okay?
All right.
And I'll let Tom take it from there.
Okay. All right. He's relaunched the poll just in case the numbers come up wildly different. We do have a few questions in the Q&A section. Before we jump into that, Albert, I just wanted to ask if I understood correctly. All 4 scenarios could be operating simultaneously, right? Depending, despite whatever, like in this case, we're in a pandemic, even though it's long, some are operating business as usual in different industries or different sectors.
Yeah, different countries could be different. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess my question is, when you look at the poll that we just had, most people want to get to, personally, they want to get to responsible tourism. How do you get to responsible tourism when, all these scenarios are going on simultaneously? And how do you get to responsible tourism when it doesn't necessarily line up that way in your model?
Now, of course, the voting for one scenario is more a tool to make people more aware of the content of the scenarios, that it is really a valuable exercise as such, because as I mentioned before, a scenario is not a prediction. So you cannot choose a scenario, basically. Mm-hmm. You have to be prepared for all of the scenarios. So whether one is more nice to have than the other is a nice experiment for your mind, but it's not the way to go. The best, or let me put it differently: if you have a public body with tax money, it is spent on things, then it's the best way to go is to go for robust strategies, and a robust strategy, a robust roadmap, anticipates all 4 scenarios. So that means you have to take measures that prepare you for all of the 4 scenarios. However, there's businesses with private money who choose betting strategies. So they bet on one scenario and they invest a lot of money, and they think, if it happens, then we are probably one of the first to tap into that market. And wealthy businesses are also having 4 different betting strategies. So they bet on 4 scenarios, and they can quickly upscale or downscale their investments. But for public bodies, that is not likely. So usually we recommend to choose for robust strategies and take the features into account that connect the scenarios with each other.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have sort of 2 questions here that are related, one from Anne and one from Pedro. Anne asks, can there be a combination of business as unusual and responsible tourism? Pedro asked, do you think that the scenarios of responsible tourism and business as unusual are incompatible? Aren't they complementary? So I think these 2 questions go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think that relates to my previous answer. We should try to stimulate the connection between the different scenarios, and how we do that in practice, for example, to give you a little bit context of how that works. If we normally would do for a business, for a client, we do workshops, and we use the World Cafe method. So that means that we have a big group of people sitting at tables, post-its, stickering, all these kind of things. And then we make implication trees. So we make a kind of mind map of the direct and the indirect implications of the scenarios. And so we get 4 different mind maps. In the next round, we ask people to put 3 green stickers and 3 red stickers on the implications in each of the scenarios. So you get clusters of red and green stickers on the things that people like and the things they dislike for the future. Mm-hmm. Then we throw the scenarios away. We continue with the post-its with the largest amount of stickers, largest number of stickers. And then we use that to create solutions, to create strategies that connect likes and dislikes with each other.
Okay.
And then, so the scenarios is a strategic framework of thinking to challenge your mind. And once that is finished, you can continue with the implications and put that into, translate that into a roadmap, for example.
Okay, excellent. This question is from Duke. What about looking into desirable scenarios that locals want to see? A bit like Kennedy saying, let's put a man on the moon. It can happen if we call it out. When we call it out, the future of tourism. So should we call out the future of tourism what we want to see, which obviously we all really want to see responsible tourism.
Yeah. I don't get the question completely. So,
well, I guess I think what he's asking is should we not, I guess, within a destination, sort of really try to guide the discussion locally to help guide the future of tourism to the direction we want to see it, which in this case would be, responsible tourism.
Yeah.
And please feel free to add something in Q&A if you want me to reform up this question.
Yeah. I think at the local level, it's not always people sometimes have difficulties to translate what happens in a macro environment in the world at large to the local level. And not so long ago, for example, we have done a study for indoor sports accommodations in a small community in the Netherlands. And the connection is for the people usually difficult to find because they think they're not impacted by it. But that's also because their dominant thinking, to say it bluntly, is so much focused on the day-to-day things that happen in a community that people do not have a clue that all these things are impacted by things far away in other industries. And that's why what we try to convince them that they really have to understand it's related to trends in leisure behavior and trends in sports, and that is related to demographic developments, for example. And so there's so much interconnectivities, and that's something we try to bring up the people. We try to bring up the people with this kind of thinking.
Okay, and then one last question, because I know we're just about out of time. Ivana asked, how do you go about convincing tour operators and stakeholders that responsible tourism is the way to go, and particularly in this post-pandemic environment where many people just probably want to get back to business and get their business, making money again at whatever cost.
Like I mentioned already, I think that's what many people think, that many people want to go back to how it was. But I think I see in my environment also that there's a lot of people who are thinking a different direction. Youngsters who change their plans, etc. People that stay in their own country. So if you want, I think that the whole situation has caused people already to contemplate more or to reflect more on their own behavior and to do things in a different way. For example, what is quite popular in the Netherlands at the moment, it came from Scandinavia, is plogging. I don't know if you know what it is, but plogging is that you are jogging and picking up litter at the same time. So people have a rucksack and they are jogging and they pick up litter, and that is fueled by the crisis. So people have become more conscious about anything in the environment. Not everybody, of course, has this consciousness or has developed this consciousness, but you see those signals around you, and of course we don't know whether it will be a wave that goes past after a few months, but I think some things will remain. And of course, we cannot foresee it. It's not a crystal ball. Again, it's not a prediction, but it's one of the likely outcomes that could happen.
Yeah. And Albert, I don't know whether you can see the poll. I don't know if the outcome is much different. It looks like the first one's a little bit different. Business as unusual is what most think is most likely to happen.
Now, the second one is quite much the same as the previous one, I think.
Yeah, the personal preferences.
Yeah. But the first one, is different now. It was responsible tourism. It has moved to business as unusual.
Yes.
So a transition of the visitor economy.
Yeah, and I think that's also driven by what some of the folks were saying in chat, that now they understand the definitions of each one of the choices probably swayed their response a little bit. We're pretty much out of time. I do want to take John's question real quick. John asks, with all the new ship builds continuing to arrive, isn't responsible tourism and mass tourism coming to loggerheads? Is this the black swan effect, where you have a collision?
Sorry, could be. Yeah.
Okay.
We have a regional airport here where that is used as a parking place at the moment for all the KLM airplanes. And of course, I'm not so familiar with the cruise industry, but yeah,
Okay.
same kind of developments could happen.
And just one last comment is from Gustin. Thanks very much. Big hug from South Chile.
Thanks a lot. Nice.
So it's always nice. Thanks everyone for your participation on the Q&A. Greatly appreciate it. All right, Larry.
Thank you very, very much. It was a pleasure having you today and providing some great information. And what we don't know, we don't know. I love that.
Exactly.
I'm going to keep that close to
That's heart. The key lesson.
Exactly. Thank you for your time. Truly, truly appreciate it.
Larry and Tom, please feel free to share the slides with the audience. You already received them, so it's not a secret. It's just share the knowledge, and it's important.
Fantastic. We'll provide you with the questions that may not have been answered to, and we'll see if we can get you to answer them and send them out to those participants. So again, thank you so much. Our next webinar is Wednesday, May 19th at 9 a.m. Miami time. Cruise restart in Singapore. Since November 2020, Singapore has been the home port for Royal Caribbean and Genting Cruise, both operating successful short cruises to nowhere. Stephen Isbar, CCO, Global Port Holdings, and CEO of Valletta Cruise Port, will moderate this panel featuring Leon Wong, COO of SATS Cruise Services, terminal operator for the Marine Bay Cruise Center, Singapore, and a key representative from the Raffles Medical Group. So please plan on joining us. Again, we want to thank Albert for being here with us today. We want to thank all the listeners for being here. Many thanks for your continued support. Be strong, be safe, and be healthy. Thanks, Tom.
Albert, thanks again. This was awesome. It was sort of like a college level class today, all the way through. We really appreciate that. And Larry, happy birthday.
Yeah,
thank you, bud.
Happy birthday.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great
day. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We really appreciate your support. Thanks again, Albert.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Destinations together, won't you set me free? I'll take a train, a plane, a big cruise ship. It doesn't really matter to me. Destination people always seem to find the magic and the mystery in this beautiful world. Don't get